For those that are seeing me for the first time, my name is Tulio. I work for IBM in the Linux on Power Toolchain team, and mainly on glibc and other libraries we support and maintain. So yeah, that's it. So as I mentioned, I wasn't sure whether if I should prepare this as a BOF or a presentation. And as I wanted to propose some things here, I left it just as a presentation, but feel free to interrupt me. Feel free to propose other things as well and reveal what I'm proposing here. So BuildBot or ARM is okay. So let's go. Let's start. So this page was not my initial plan, but as we had some issues recently with the BuildBot, and I reported that in the mailing list, I just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of this. It's up and it's working. Thank you, Roland,
I'm
for.
sorry that I let it go down. I really
no, it happens.
fell down, but I spent weeks not even. Originally, I was looking at the page every day to make sure things were up,
Yeah.
and then the VM was shut down, and I didn't notice. So that's not good.
Okay, and do you think it makes sense to have something monitoring it?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
oops, that was fast.
Sorry, I was reading.
Okay, it's something to think about.
You probably just need like a Mag iOS setup where it just watches all the boxes and
Yeah.
makes sure that they're live and then notifies us if they're
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're kind
That's
of in
it.
the early days, right? Like once the more things you get set up, eventually you get to the point where you can begin discussing how do you nag people when things break and if things are identified as the breaking changes.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned because right now the PowerPC box is broken. We have a file system issue there, which I'm planning to fix when I return. But yeah, yeah, that's something to think about. Okay.
Yeah, and so the setup we have is it's very minimal, as you know. What you see is all there is to it, and the master machine at Google that only I can control, only Google people can control. Only I can control it, but there's nothing more there than what you would think. It's
Yeah.
just a vanilla distro install with BuildBot on it, and there's nothing fancy going on there. I think it probably makes sense to talk to Sergio, who's done the GB
Yes.
setup, which is quite a bit more fully fleshed out and sophisticated than what we have going, and probably we should try to pool efforts there. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any rocket science involved in any of this. It's just people putting time into it, and I don't have much time to.
But this is the kind of thing where the FSF saying, or David saying, if there was money to help, what would it be? Well, have an admin who runs Mag iOS on all the GNU BuildBots and make sure that they're all up. And if they're not up, notify the requisite contact to make sure that the machine's up. Because you could be busy doing something else, thinking the machine is up and that way. So right now the x86-64 build is dealing with a solid green, but I think that i6-86 has this problem building on the Ubuntu config, the default, right, Roland?
I have not.
Yeah.
I have not looked on since the other day when I switched the master back on again. I saw okay, some builders have started, and then I didn't look at it again for the rest of the week. I think I turned it on maybe the day before I, had to sort of went away for the weekend and then was traveling here. So I don't think there. Last I knew, a month or more ago, the x86-32 was green as well, and I don't know what its problem is. I haven't looked, so
It's never been green. Oh, wait, it was green once.
Yeah, so
I'm going to say,
we
so
need to
there's
look at it.
definitely like an Ubuntu i686 header issue that causes that build to have problems. So, I'll have to.
Yeah, we'll have to figure it out. I don't think there's anything, deep.
Can I help you with that?
Sure.
Can I just SSH into that box? Or do you have to put my keys
No, I need to check, but as far as I know, I'm not really at liberty to give access to anybody outside Google to those boxes.
Okay.
Feel free to set up another x86 slave that doesn't have this button.
Sure. Yeah.
Good, and moving on with the current status, just to make it clear, my goal here is to make the BuildBot be more useful and obviously used more. Okay, so our current status is we have 3 builders, x86, x86-64, and a PPC-64 big endian, but only 2 build slaves, one for x86 as far as I remember, and another one for which is able to run both of the builders.
But and I mean I've spent maybe a total of an hour reading BuildBot documentation, so maybe the configuration is not optimal, but yeah, there's one x86 slave which does both the 32 and 64, but it's serialized. They're serialized. It only does one at a time. So the turnaround time is not great.
Yeah, yeah. And especially if we add more builders for x86, and I'm going to mention that, it may not escalate well. So yeah, it's something we have to discuss. We have the Ansible playbook to set up a new build slave. There is also documentation in the wiki page, which is basically describing what the Ansible playbook does. However, I'm probably being perfectionist here, but we have the domain name or the URL issue there. Whenever you go there, it switches to an IP address and
Yeah, I am not happy with that, and I didn't do anything about it. So the complexity there originally, so that Buildmaster was, so the resources at Google that we're using are being provided by the Dynamic Tools team, the folks who maintain the sanitizers, and they have just sort of generously said, hey, you can use some of our resource budget. But that being the case, we're overloading the Buildmaster is a machine that is also a Buildmaster for some of their other bots. However, and for that reason, it doesn't talk on port 80, so you need to do some proxy stuff to give it a good URL. And nobody's done the probably pretty trivial for anybody who's prepared to spend a few hours with Apache configuration to set that up. Or I need to talk to them, and I will, when I get home, I will talk to them. So the fact that the machine was turned off for weeks suggests that maybe they're not actually using it. So perhaps I could change that configuration, have it be on port 80, and then it would be easy to just assign the DNS name to the IP address.
Okay.
So why is it hard to assign? What does the port address do anything with the assignment for the DNS name?
No, it's just that to have a nice URL, you want it to be on port 80.
It doesn't have to be. Are you saying just because port 80:8080 shows up? Right now, it's kind of ugly as it's 132.11.48, 148.
Yeah. No, what we want is for it to be, glibc build.gnu.org.
Yeah.
And
but it can still be :8080.
it could be, but it would be preferable if it didn't have to be.
Yeah, in fact, I wasn't mentioning about the 8080. That doesn't bother
Yeah.
very much. But whenever you go to that waterfall page, it switches to the IP address.
Right.
And if you try to copy that address, it doesn't sound like it's really coming from the glibc project.
Yeah,
I mean, we
yeah.
did a-
So that may be just I
Can I
tried
just
at some
tell-
point to set it up. So there is an alias I made that refers to that. There is a domain name that refers to that address that I made, and I think I tried at some point to set the URL in BuildBot and just didn't figure out the configuration right. So these are all things where just if anybody spent more than half an hour at lunchtime, you know, to do it, because it's, you know, I have really never put any serious effort into this. I put like at most an hour at a time, and then gone back to other things, not thought about it for a week.
Okay.
So this is all stuff where just if any of us just decides to actually spend all day until it's right, then we can get it right, and it won't be a big deal.
Okay.
So, wait, we're not able to log into that machine to help you out. Should we be trying to migrate that machine out of the Google systems? We have the
If there's another place to host it, that would be great. I'm not very clear on where the GDB one is hosted.
It's hosted on a personal machine from Sergio.
Yeah.
Right.
So what are the requirements for the master?
Not very, very little. I think it's quite, I mean, it just needs to run a web server. It needs to run BuildBot, which is its own web server, and then depending how you want to set it up, you might want to have a front-end web server on it. But I think the load on the machine is quite low. For the master, I think almost none, because
There should be none, because you just put the
yeah.
slaves.
yeah, I mean, it just
You
has
have the
a little
logs.
database for keeping track of the slaves, and all the actual work is on the slaves.
And the logs, which can get big with time. The logs can get big with the time. So
Which can be cycled out or
yeah. But yeah,
it could probably just be implemented with like a Raspberry Pi or something like that.
Well, yes, I mean, the most useful feature for this server would be that it's reliably up all the time,
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, that I can manage.
seems more.
I have
more-
a few boards lying around. I could just put that.
Okay, I mean, I think all of us can come up with some, you know, random, well-connected machines, cloud resources, whatever, that is a better answer than you doing that. So, that sounds great, but
No,
it's
yeah.
pathetic if we're relying on you doing that. So,
Well,
and I can provide this Google Cloud resource where, you know, connectivity is not an issue, and for the level of resources we need, the resources are not an issue. It's just, you know, setting up
the
conferences.
blocker appears to be accessed by non-Google employees to the machine, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's why it would be better if we could get some, so I could go back and talk to folks at Google about if it's possible to set something up like that. What we're using now is basically what the Dynamic Tools team has for their own internal use, and they said that you can just piggyback back on that, and it's easy to just give access to anybody who's in Google to that, to do something that external people could have access to. I think we might have to actually do something slightly more formal and get some approval from somebody at Google and so forth. So we can look into that. But there's very little complexity and not a lot of resources going on there. So anybody else who can host it, I have no particular desire for
We all
Google to
have
host
similar
it.
problems, right? So if I put this
Right.
machine on, so in the Toronto office for Red Hat, we've got a bunch of big boxes, and even one of them is a VM server, which has just like 15 different VMs running on it. But still, I'd probably be restricted by IT to not allow anyone
Right.
not a Red Hat.
We
So
probably
I-
have all of
I
those.
have I may have a solution for this. Yes, the Open Power Foundation provides these Openstack accounts free of charge, and maybe we could host it there, and everyone could have access to that virtual machine. And
That would be great.
there is only one problem: there is no SLA. So I'm not sure if that's going to be really. It has been stable, but there is no guarantee it's going to be.
So for one, I think moving the hosting around is really not very hard. So we could move it over there, and if in the long run it turns out not to be a stable solution, we can look for another one. I think.
Yeah, I think the hard part is actually finding a low-cost, publicly accessible server that we can set up for a number of key developers to glue into the slaves, but to have access so that I can log in and support you if you're on vacation, and we're all different employees.
Yeah, so OpenStack sounds like the best.
Who does it run on sourceware?
So
sourceware is already overloaded. So
yeah, so that's why we talked about, if we had money, you need both new machines to like split sourceware's services so that there'd be like a sourceware 2 that, for example, just runs GCC stuff, and then you might be able to say sourceware is unloaded, but sourceware routinely climbs up to load 15 or something when everyone's working on it. It is
and it's just
overutilized.
and all of us, well, most of us here work for giant companies with enormous amounts of resources that we can put to it. We just have to figure out how to make it happen.
Does it have to be an x86 machine?
No, the build master doesn't matter. Anything.
Because we are about to donate a massive M7 spunk to the GCC compiler fund. Well, don't laugh.
So whatever.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, whatever it is, if it's running some fairly recent Linux distribution where there's a
The
BuildBot
reason
package,
you'd laugh
it's
if
fine.
you knew how many spark bugs there are in the glibc port that could probably impact the performance, but.
Performance, but for the build master, performance is not an issue.
Yeah.
It's sourceware is so overloaded that even that I would not ask sourceware overseers to host even a tiny additional thing. But for the master, any hosting anywhere should be sufficient. Something that is likely to stay up and that all of the poor people can have access to.
Yeah.
Would be
And if we find one, I believe Sergio would be interested.
So I thought David Edelson last year, and didn't hear him. He said that it would be okay for us to try to think about the GCC compile farm as the GNU machine farm, and that if we can convince the present maintainers to like give us a slice of a machine to permanently use for a BuildBot master, that would be okay. Is that an option we should pursue?
Sure. Any of the, I think. I think all of these options are fine. Like, so if Tulio sets something up on Open Power, if Jose gets the Spark machine in the compile farm and makes that work, that whoever gets there first and finds it easy to do or finds the time to do it, somebody just offer something.
It's just important to have. Sorry.
A virtual machine is also fine.
Yeah, what it is, it's a virtual machine now.
Okay, so the consensus then is let's move it out of the current Google hosting because we want everyone to be able to assist in the access.
Yeah, if there's something that can be community maintained where all trusted community members can log into it and maintain it, then that would be ideal.
Is it just a VM? Can we just slurp the VM image across to another? Well, it's obviously can't run on Open Power, but if we got an x86 box and it's just a file farm, can I just
There's
copy
very
the
little
image
set.
over?
It's sure, there's nothing secret on the VM or anything, but it's probably less work to just spin up a new one from scratch and migrate the configuration over than to do that. But all of this is down to whoever wants to do the legwork to do a new setup. Somebody just make it happen.
Your Ansible playbook is just for the slaves?
For the slaves, yeah. But we can tune it. Certainly.
And it's certainly, and the current setup is not particularly great. When I turned the VM back on the other day, as far as I could tell, it didn't automatically start the server on boot. I had to do something manually. So, there's basically nothing lost by starting over because what we have now is very minimal and not particularly well set up.
I'm building a developer box next month, so I could easily start up again.
All right.
we have three options now. Great.
I could even look at the amount of developers of cloud and see if there's something there. So,
Yeah, I think finding a new place to host a master is
it's a secondary problem.
It's not much of an issue. That there's much that certainly would help. And having one, I think the biggest thing that would help would be just having one that people from multiple organizations can have admin access to. And as far as the work involved in it, there's not a lot of work. It's just we're all busy and haven't gotten to it. The resource is a pretty tiny resource for the master. So yeah, anybody who has a spare day, just try to get something going. And
And
if there's anything from the current machine that you can't already see that you want, then just ask me and I'll try to get it to you.
great.
Okay, so what's the next point? No way to ignore.
Yeah, so that's another problem. This is something that may generate some debate here, but we have this problem, especially on power, that we have historically many test case failing, and we've been working to reduce that, but we still have 3 test case failing. Sounds like, but we still have 3 test case failing, which we are working to solve that.
Failing, you have the build failing to build. Because if they fail, you can exfil them and mark as exfail in the test suite.
Yes, that's an option which I don't know, it's a good option. It's the kind of, that kind of failure is a failure that I believe we have to fix, we have to analyze, but okay, it has been that way for 10 years, and it's going to take probably 1-2 years more until we are able to fix all those math issues. So if we could have a way to just ignore those failures and make sure that new failures doesn't appear.
So I think
show green if your test suite passes and exits in 0.
Yes, but it doesn't pass right now.
So I think we should address that. We can address that by having configuration specific Xfail set just in the source tree. We should endeavor for every maintained configuration is green. If there's a known ongoing problem, we should have an Xfail that it's only Xfail for that particular configuration. And we should just have a sort of a policy about, temporary Xfails should be associated with a Bugzilla bug. We should have some, comments and annotations so that, they don't stay Xfails forever, so that it stays on somebody's radar that this needs to be fixed.
We have that in Red Hat. Basically, every temp Xfail has an open bug that gets tracked in our waiver process for the releases. So there is, if we want, I could easily just go and get all the currently open bugs we have with these and just transplant them into sourceware, and then we'll have the open bugs with test cancel 17, test CPU clock 2, test enter. They're like these tests that fail sporadically.
Yeah, I think we should, as a for
but
our community
exfail
bug.
them and then comment in the exfail. This is tied to this bug and it's training.
Yeah, and ideally do that with some sort of formulaic comment that can be sort of machine readable. So if somebody gets excited and wants to do some nice web thing somewhere for us to keep track of these things, then it becomes easy. But yeah, I think we should do that, and we should figure out whatever we need to figure out as far as procedures and policies, so that nobody objects to these Xfail markings, because everybody's confident that they are temporary, not just sweeping problems under the rug.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, but that's one of the solutions. The other one, which is GDB adopted, is to have another step in the BuildBot, which it has a history and analyze the difference. Yeah.
So I think that is something that they do because their test suite is so massive and flaky.
Yeah.
let's hope that we don't need to do that,
Yeah.
because that's something that you do when you give it up on making your tests actually be reliable.
I agree.
Yeah, internally we have also a BuildBot running, and it's slightly based on the initial proposal, but we apply a patch to mark those test cases as Xfails.
So that patch should go upstream. We should file bugs for every one of the
Yeah, in this case, we just have a step that applies this patch, but it checks out the code, applies the patch, and runs. So that's another possibility as well. And it makes clear that it's still failing in the Git source code, but in the BuildBot, you have that. But yeah.
Yeah, and I haven't looked into BuildBot. You know, maybe there's something easy in BuildBot configuration where we, you know, if pick your other color, if we could have these show up as orange or yellow, or this you know, something between green and red to say this is a known failure, but you know, don't become satisfied because it's not green.
BuildBot does have the warning. It does recognize warnings,
Right.
so it's going to show as
I think it's
yellow, something.
I don't know why that even matters. Just mark it green and move on. The point is that you have this backlog of things that we need to work on as a community, and I don't care. What I care about is prioritizing that, finding the ones that are most important to our new users, and fixing those things first.
Agreed.
Working on them first. There is
Well, also,
no-
Mark,
no
I would like to avoid, you know, so we have some Xfails that are just staying Xfail for years and years,
Who
and we want to
cares?
avoid
Because
that.
they're low priority. If they're not actually important, they don't matter to our users, and we don't have to work on them. There are reliability issues with our users, whereas if we decide that reliability has now become something that's important, we can pull up all these test cases and start working on them. But it's up to us to prioritize. All I care about is the BuildBot shows green if you didn't immediately break anything that wasn't already known to be broken and decided to be low priority.
Sure, that's fine.
Expo mechanism stops you sliding into more and more failures.
It does.
Seeing the yellow thing every day.
Yeah,
saying, well, that
because-
was yellow yesterday, so it's okay.
But when you add the Xfail to transition you from red to green, you have to file a bug, you have
Agreed.
to add a comment, and in the bug there needs to be
Yes.
an initial analysis of the risk
All
of
right.
the thing that you just filed. I'm
All
going
right,
to file all the
propose
bugs. I'm done.
File all the bugs, propose the detailed policy for those bug and comment conventions, and let's make it happen next week.
Okay.
Great, so move forward. So yeah, everything we are speaking here doesn't make much sense if we don't get more build slave for at least most of the ABIs, if not all of them. I'm trying to solve the problem of the power ones. I'm already preparing. I have one BuildBot ready for the Little Engine ABI, and I still have to start preparing the 32-bit one. But yeah, if someone else could help providing more, I heard the Spark, maybe ARM.
So I have 2 points about this. One is that as a technical matter, especially for the less resourced architectures, better than what we have now, and good for lots of the purposes where we have sort of inadvertent breaks of somebody else's ABI, it would be relatively easy, depending on the distro of the host, to set up cross build only slaves.
Yes.
I think Sudesh maybe knows, did that cross kernel headers thing did that actually get in?
It is not in place. We only
I-
have cross bin utils.
Yeah, so I done a review of that. You've done a package,
Yeah.
new package request, right? I done a
Right.
review, but there was something else that was supposed to be done.
Right, and I didn't follow up. But so as far as I know,
Why do
with
we
a
need that?
tiny little bit of follow up of that, then a Fedora-based slave could cross build all of our architectures and do build only testing, so that without having built. So this is all so slaves to do actual testing, or even VM slaves to do actual testing. But I think we should open the possibility, and perhaps if it's easy for some of us to set this up before all the architectures can get real slaves going, then maybe Sudesh and I can work on that and get that cross setup done.
Why do we need the cross headers? It's set the arch, make headers installed with that arch set, and you target a directory and it produces a set of kernel headers you need to do the glibc build, and you cross with that. Like, why do we need a package?
The package was just the way that made it easy for me to do it on my Fedora machine. If you want to set that up, then go
Yeah,
for it.
I mean, I do it all the time on my local machine. I have a set of scripts that are basically pull down the Linux kernel, check for UAPI header changes that might cause us to start conflicting, so that we have to go yell at the Linux kernel
Okay.
guys, and then it processes to do crossbuild.
Let's get something based on those scripts into
Sure.
our BuildBot
But
repo.
this is going
and
to
set
be
it up.
expensive. There are 64 different ADIs that we could possibly build, and yeah, it would.
Yeah, right now we're building 3 of them.
Yeah.
So okay, so everyone helps, and also so I'm mostly thinking. So not every ABI matters, but I'm thinking of I'm thinking of 68K alpha, the things where like it's not reasonable to demand that somebody pony up a real build slave for alpha because there aren't any, but it's relatively easy to make sure that we don't just stupidly break the build by doing cross build. So that was point 1. Point 2 is I think we really should, and so this is something I told Carlos I wanted to raise in the general block, but we might as well talk about it here because we're talking about BuildBot. I think we should set a goal for the community to get to the place where we think it's reasonable to have a policy that every maintained architecture must have functioning build slaves in the system.
Interesting.
And I think the reasonable thing to do is to say that it's the architecture maintainer's responsibility to arrange that happens. Now, this doesn't mean that Dave Miller has to spin up build slaves for Spark. In that case, it means that whoever is the obvious party for those resources, for Spark, it's Oracle. For Power and 390, it's IBM. For both flavors of ARM, it's ARM, Linaro, Cavium, whoever else does that. But it would be great if we could get to a policy of part of being a properly maintained architecture is having maintained build slaves.
Are you talking for primary architectures only, or are you talking secondary as well?
Everything. I think so. I think this is an aspirational goal, and it's reasonable to demand that the well-funded architectures do it damn quick because there's no excuse. But I think it's also reasonable to make it a goal that even for 68K and alpha, that we actually have one, even if it's just a QEMU alpha that somebody runs somewhere. At some point, we get somebody to put in the little legwork to set that up on some x86 VM.
Yeah. So I mean, David's here. So David, you commented last year about a GCC build farm. Really, when we spoke last year about, could it be considered the GNU machine farm? Really, because that alpha VM could get set up on one of those machines in there, so that we have access to it, so that people can. It's a place, employer neutral place that everyone will be able to log into without needing VPN access. All that sort of things.
Yep, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, just practically for programs, we don't actually use BuildBot, but just the Echo script. But for ARM64, Power and x86, you can actually use the GC compile farm. There are machines where you can use a slave for S390. Marist
Yes.
University is a
No,
no.
they came on a lot. I've already told, I don't know why Tulio didn't include the slide, that I run BuildBots in the same place I'm already running the GED and Python BuildBots.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
So,
So, yeah, that's a specific case for S390. We are trying to find another place to run those, but
yeah, so I don't think we need to figure out here today what all the places where the resources come from are.
I think for S390, you can use the Marist one. At least I can ask because if they allow programming.
Well, okay, so what I would,
This is not as.
We're not, I think that, no objection here. Step
Yeah.
1 is cross-compile to make sure we don't fail to cover the ABI. And step 2
Right.
is eventually get to places where we can actually run the regression tests on a target.
right, but so actual step 1 is for each of these things, somebody to agree to do it.
Sure.
So you, me, and Sadesh have in the past or currently done various things about the cross-compile case. Maybe between us, we could make the action item to say, we will figure out scripts or whatever the hell we need to make that happen.
Yeah.
Cross-compile can be done from, presumably, the easiest thing is for cross-compiles to be done on x86 64 hosts.
It's the
because we offer
fastest and
those.
simplest and most tested case, I think.
And I can certainly, offer another x86 VM that can do some cross compiles. You can, everybody can. So let's get this. Let's agree to work and soon on the scripts so that given some machine resource, the cross compile case can be done, and then let's get machines set up and actually have all the cross builders done, and then let's agree that for all the other machines, somebody for each machine takes on the task of figuring out who will supply the resources and coordinating it. And I think in the long term, I think it makes sense for that sort of top level role for each architecture to be a responsibility of an architecture maintainer, but delegated it however works for whoever wants to help. So, Dave is the Spark architecture maintainer, but maybe we can get Jose to help out with actually doing that stuff for Spark, and that's great. And there's Martin is the 390 maintainer, but whoever at IBM can help figure out the 390 resources. Let's make it happen. Right. Right. So, but I think a year ago, most of us said lots of, it shouldn't be a problem to get slaves.
Sure.
And it didn't happen. So, for each architecture, let's get somebody signed up to put their name as, I promise to try to make this happen soon.
Architecture OS combinations. So, I know we discussed this, but
Well,
there, yeah.
we're currently we have 3 architectures covered, each with only 1 OS. So let's get every architecture to non-zero and then worry about better coverage.
I promise I will get you the 4 VMs that I have wired into this. So they will be x86, 32 and 64-bit, and rawhide and x24.
Great.
How are the slaves communicating with the master?
It's just web stuff. I'm not sure.
no, there is a different, I believe it's HTTP, but in a different port. But the port is in the master, so it's...
Yeah, the slaves can be behind whatever So slaves just have to be able to make an outgoing connection to the master. Nobody has to be able to get into the slave.
Okay,
And to the Git repository as well.
We don't even have to wait for the biggest part machine to be donated. We can create
Right.
DOMs internally and just.
Great.
I mean, so community accessible machines are nice so that more than one person can log in and figure out problems. But you know, right now we have a power slave that only Tulio can log into. We have an x86 slave that only I can log into.
Yeah.
That's better than nothing. If you can supply something.
I can do it this quick, yeah.
In fact, just correcting, for the I am the official maintainer of that slave, but we have more people accessing it, including Sergio, Ed Jr., Gabriel as well. So we have more people maintaining that
I
server.
mean, almost anybody at Google could easily be able to get into the things I can maintain too. But,
Okay.
Yeah.
And continuing here, the next step for having those slaves is what is necessary to make it even easier to set up them. Do you think the Ansible playbook is enough? Shall I change it in a way to make it easier, documentation, or is it fine right now?
I think it's fine right now, but
Yeah, I mean, whatever works that is easy for people to use, I don't
Yeah.
know, because I'm old-fashioned. I tend to do things by hand, and I don't understand all these fancy things. But
Okay.
it would be great if there's a turnkey kind of thing that people can
there is,
use.
yeah.
Whatever
Ansible.
makes it easy for people.
Okay, and may I propose that Ansible playbook as a patch for the glibc BuildBot? Because right now it's just an attachment in the mailing list.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can
Yeah.
put it in the repo?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Under scripts somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, so nobody should feel constrained about proposing things for the glibc BuildBot repo. I mean, unless somebody wants to object, I don't think we even care about the, ownership and copyright assignment or whatever. It's just scripts that we care.
Okay.
So I think without any formality to the procedure, we should have, sort of normal patch approval kind of stuff about that. But yeah, everybody should assume it's easy to get whatever the hell you want in there, including just adding some more documentation files, adding, hey, this is a script I'm using, maybe it will work for you, maybe it won't. Just if
Would it be
putting more
setting
things
up
in there.
a mailing list for people to discuss problems like that?
Well, so far we have just used the main libc mailing list for that. I don't think there's a particular reason to use a separate mailing list.
Yeah, it's just
But if
so few
it's
patches.
beneficial to have a separate mailing list, that's usually good. Right. I mean, it's been the case that I have, since it's all on the same mailing list, I am as unresponsive in things about the BuildBot as I am for patch reviews, but I'll try to be better about that.
Great, so moving forward, first proposals I have, and I'd like to start working on this. We are almost at the top of the hour, but
That's okay, the next thing is the general law.
yeah, we can continue there. So yeah, I'd like to increase the amount of builders there as soon as I have more power build slaves there. And each one to test those particular settings like enable multi-arch, disable multi-arch. We have seen issues recently in the glibc source code that one of them were broken. Also for lock elision as well. And internally, we've been testing using with CPU as well, so that we could generate code for each of those architectures and ensure they work. Although these are going to be more complicated.
So are you thinking of oldest GCC as well?
Yes.
GCC?
Yes.
GCC we claim to support, along with the oldest set of tools we claim to support.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we should have as many permutations of all this whole matrix as we can, and I think the only, the only thing we need to sort of communally decide on is how we name it. We want some coherent, when we have more than a handful of them, we want some coherent conventions for how we name the builders.
I think that is the least of our worries. Our worries are going to be, like testing, what happens when one of them fails, and who's responsible for fixing it?
Agreed, but having, currently we have 3 columns, one of which is red. Having more columns, some of which are sometimes red, would be a better starting place for figuring out whose problem it is that it's red.
Sure.
So right now we don't even know.
You can do as much testing as you want. If nobody looks at the testing results, then.
Agreed. Agreed. We should not wait to have the testing happen until we've figured out how we're going to respond to it. And I mean, for one thing, if we're lucky, then we turn on 25 more permutations and they're all green, then we don't have too much to worry about, and we can see how it goes. So I think in
Can I just say, like, person whose commit broke it should be looking at it, and so like when we turn on the 25 and they're all red because your commits broke them, because you're the most likely person with the number of commits that.
Well, I mean, I think it's going to have to be sure, but we can't have any hard and fast process, because sometimes if my commit broke an arcane configuration that only somebody else is expert enough to figure out the issues of how that broke, there's going to have to be some collaboration. And I don't think we should I don't think we should be eager to set up any sort of hard and fast policies about, like, it went red so your change gets reverted or anything like that. Maybe we'll get there, but let's just incrementally get more testing, see how it's going, talk about what rules and procedures make sense, and go step by step. I don't think we should try to figure out too much of a plan before we're actually executing it.
Can you group slaves into groups in the UI?
There is some way to do that. I don't know how it happens.
What
In other BuildBot instances that I use and do not administer, there are groupings like that. So I'm sure there's some way to do it.
What do you mean by grouping?
Just in the UI, so it says
group. So these things
so instead
are
of 1,000 columns, you have a title that says, like, these are the x86 ones, and then 5 different.
Okay.
And BuildBot does have some features.
like a group that basically says these should always be green below.
Stable, all.
Yeah.
If you commit and any of this group goes red, then you're going to get your commit reverted. And the rest of these are informative across 64 different ABIs.
Okay, so you're getting a little bit into.
Well, I'm just asking,
too many
how do
policies.
they group? Is it possible to group?
I believe it is. I do not know the detail. I have spent an aggregate total of less than an hour reading BuildBot documentation, but
Mark has
sure
just
there
shown
are
me
those
that there are tags, and the slaves can be tagged, and then you can group on tag.
Yeah, there is something like that. So.
So for example, the LLVM BuildBot setup has exactly that. So they have various groups, and they have one group with experimental build slaves, and if they go red, nobody cares really.
Yeah. So tags. Apparently, I'm just being shown tags.
Yeah. Yeah. So everybody here is capable of reading the BuildBot documentation and sending patches to the BuildBot configuration to try to improve this stuff. So let's all do it.
Sure. Great.
So talking about the old GCC, that's of course interesting, but also might be interesting to sort of try a very recent, so top of the tree, GCC, GNU Tools, glibc, everything together. That sometimes shows interesting things.
Yes.
Yes, that's important as well.
So Leonardo has a toolchain called AIM, which helps build the entire toolchain. It's GCC, GNU Tools, glibc, and then you counter this final result. And I've frequently done this thing where I'm compiling with the compiler, glibc, whatever I've patched, and do things together. So it shouldn't be too hard to set up.
Can you contribute it?
So Abe is it's available in the GitHub.
Oh, okay.
Perfect. Download and use it. What I'm thinking is I'll probably set up a BuildBot using it for maybe armor.
Oh, so the slave pre-runs 8, right?
Yeah, the slave
Pre-runs
will
8,
run
builds
and
everything for
then
master, and then for that day, you're building everything on an experimental checkout for the day.
So the only question is whether I run GCC master as well as glibc master or some release or GCC. So that'll be combination.
Yeah, well, at IBM, we've been playing with that, and especially integrating the three main toolchain packages being able to use glibc and GCC. And we are moving forward in a way that we are going to get one of those, like GCC, get the latest GCC, test it, and see if it builds the rest. If it's fine, integrate that. Now go to the next one, take, test, build, rebuild everything, and goes that way. Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Not entirely, because you can do that, but then usually that's the entire thing at once.
Interesting.
The question I have in that context is a crossbuild sufficient, or do you want to test also? But because a test wouldn't be a big deal. All I'll have to do is probably copy what the GCC source onto my board and run test.
Builds is good, test is better. So, but
So
yes, we want
bare
everything.
minimum, right?
We want everything. I would say we want everything, but it's okay if we don't get it now. So, so I would say the preference should be to incrementally get more testing than of any kind, skill testing, whatever. Incrementally try to deliver more that we all actually see in the waterfall as soon as possible for each increment, rather than trying to get something all singing, all dancing before delivering.
Okay. So I believe we have just 5 minutes until the next, the glibc BOF. Maybe we could stop here before I continue, because right now I'm going to start, just 1 minute, I'm going to start talking about more ideas I had, which I don't plan to implement right now, but I believe it could feed someone with those ideas, and we can discuss that in the glibc BOF.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, why don't you, if you got another slide, show us your slide, but
Is the BOF in this room?
No.
No. Yeah, that's why it's good to finish. But you had it.
No, is there any place where I can fetch the source code for this? So if I want to set up a slave?
Yes.
Tomorrow, I don't know.
Yeah. There's a repository. I think there's a wiki page that points to everything.
The glibc wiki.
Yeah.
Yes, there is a Git repository at Sourceware. It's called glibc BuildBot. It does have a script there, okay, that works for Debian, as far as I remember. We have a wiki page describing the steps you have to configure to set up the build slave. And in the mailing list, we also have an Ansible playbook, in case you prefer, that I already tested on Debian and Fedora, and you just
I will look at the wiki.
Can you make sure that information gets into the wiki for this Cauldron, so that we're looking at coming from Cauldron?
Great. Yeah, I can't edit the Cauldron wiki page, but yeah, I'm going to to find a way to put that.
What, email?
Yeah, email
Yeah.
me. We'll actually
Yeah. So I think the answer should be anything useful about this stuff should go on the BuildBot page on the GNU wiki.
Yeah.
Make sure that there's a pointer to that wiki page in the Cauldron box.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for